Hello, Chant. It's a wet day today in Cincinnati. Uh, it's still pretty nice. Reminds me of kind of Bay Area weather to an extent, but uh, not cold enough for a hoodie, but definitely not warm. Uh, Low 70s, so it's actually really nice. Uh, Albeit kind of gloomy. Look, clouds and, you know, wet. Well, humidity is not too bad. It's actually not too muggy out. Just cloudy and wet. That's okay. Hope everyone's doing okay. It's crazy to think I only have like a few streams left. You haven't been coming into the streams. And I gotta imagine everyone listening to this does watch the streams. Or at least catches up with the VODs or something. But yeah, after tonight, I'll have I think almost 2 weeks left of streams. Now, it's 2 weeks, but I stream on that channel 3 days a week, so about a month left, which makes sense because my last day is October 29th. So I'm pretty excited, nervous, fun, but excited for the future. So with that said, get into some questions. Lots of awesome questions recently, by the way, so please continue asking questions. There's a lot more people asking questions too, so best ways to do that are in the Discord. You ask me in chat. Sometimes I'll grab those questions and save them for the pod. And you could also put questions in the comment section wherever you are watching this. So, okay. Or listening to this. Not a lot of people watch this, right? It's like pretty unwatchable. You know? Like, what are you really watching? So, I guess that's the point, right? All right, a few questions. I'm going to try to get through all of them. And I will try to stick to be concise about all of them today. That's my goal. Brevity is my goal today. We'll start with a fun one first. Someone asked about starting pitchers who go to the pen. Does their stuff tick up? And this should be a pretty straightforward answer. Like, you gotta imagine the purpose, right? So, two great examples. We'll start with an older one. We used to have a starting pitcher, Robert Stevenson. First round pick out of high school. Started for the Cincinnati Reds for several years. Made his move into the bullpen. Had this wicked slider from like a pretty crazy slot and angle. But altogether, arsenal and everything, couldn't keep him in the starting role. So when we moved him to the pen, 2019-ish, he ended up being really effective out of the pen. Just a nasty, like, get you out slider, threw it like 50% of the time. At the time, people were still pretty heavy on the fastball, and there weren't a ton of people who were like one pitch type specialists yet. Like you see now, you see a lot of people doing cutter as a primary pitch. You see a lot of people throwing slider as their primary pitch. You see people with like 50% change-ups or off-speed pitches. That used to be a lot more rare, even as recent as like 5-ish years ago. So it was a gutsy move, but the vision was cool. It was like, throw your best pitch, get a lot of outs. He did that. Went into free agency, and got picked up by a few different teams. Landed with the Rays, and ended up figuring out even more about his release characteristics and everything in terms of pitching development. Then got a pretty nice deal and was supposed to be a starter for the Angels. And then I believe he got injured, and I think he might still be on the roster, but he's floating around out there somewhere. But I got injured. I don't know if he started, but he's definitely still pitching somewhere. Anyway, with all that said, it's very possible that someone who is a starter goes to the pen and becomes a more effective reliever, not because, not just specifically because their stuff plays up, right? But because other things too, right? Like for Robert Stevenson, it was just throw your best pitch the most. And it took kind of a move to the pen for him to start doing that, right? Michael Lorenzen is kind of the opposite example. He threw like 6 different pitch types as a reliever with the Reds. Then people tried him out as a starter, ended up getting picked up by Kansas, then again by, I think at the trade deadline or something, by the Phillies. Threw a no-hitter as a starter. Still a starter, but a lot of people kind of think of him as that tweener. Is he a starter? Or can he just throw like cutter, fastball, and then be like this crazy closer? He's obviously still starting, still a starter, but he's clearly also played high leverage relief roles with us, as with the Reds. So it's it could go both ways, Sometimes pitchers who are starters who go to relief, they aren't necessarily better as relievers, and vice versa. Pitchers who are relievers, who seem like they could be starters, might not always be great starters. Now, few stats for y'all. One, the majority of major league relief pitchers, the majority of them, I think like 60 or so percent, were starters through the minors. They were drafted as a starter. In minor leagues, they were starting all the way up into like probably AAA for a lot of them. They were starters. And then push comes to shove. The way that they make it onto the major league team is through the pen, and they ended up being extremely effective in that role. And it is what it is. Aroldis Chapman happened to him. He was a starter all through the minors, and then came up, and the thought was, well, we could really use some help in the bullpen with a guy like that. Ends up going into the pen and never came out of it. Ends up being one of this generation's best closers or best relievers. So, so sometimes it just happens. Sometimes you move from a starting role to a relief role because that's just the demands or the needs of the team at the time, and then you're kind of typecasted into that role because you're so effective in it, and you just never come out of it. So one stat being most relief pitchers in the majors used to be minor league starters. And of course, when they were acquired or drafted, when you're drafting players, you're not drafting relievers for the most part. At least that's not the thought. When you're drafting players, amateurs, a lot of the time, they're the best pitcher on their team. And they're starting, right? They're playing bulk innings, striking out guys, being extremely effective as a starter. So you're always trying to acquire as many starters as possible because they're rare. They're hard to find. It's hard to know which ones can do it at the major league level. So, does stuff tick up when you move into the pen? Statistically, yeah, right? The last example I'll use from my team is Graham Ashcraft. Used to be a starter. A lot of people saw him as a starter. A lot of people still see him as a starter. You know, you'll go online, you read posts, and it's like, hey, this guy's got 3+ pitches, and a lot of guys in Major League Baseball, starters, throw 3+. Justin Verlander, 3 pitches his entire career. So, not saying Graham Ashcraft's Justin Verlander by any means, but there's clearly precedence for people who throw 3 pitch types and are effective as starters. You know, some guys throw 2 pitch types. You know, Rich Hill. I mean, it's a little cheating because he has 2 arm angles, but fastball, curveball, 2 different slots. It is 2 pitch types, just moves the slot around. So you do have guys who are effective with 2, at the very least, 2 pitches. And a lot of guys, because of lefty-righty splits, usually only throw 2 pitch types to one side and throw 2, usually the fastball and a different pitch type, to the left side, right? So Graham Ashcraft has an arsenal that clearly looks like it could be a starting arsenal. But we moved into the pen, and now it's like 100-mile-an-hour cutter, right? The other night, I think he threw, it was like 10 pitches. I think he threw 10 pitches, got 3 outs, 8 of them cutter, 2 of them sliders. So his slider is also one of the better sliders in the league. A few years ago, I think literally 2 years ago, there were articles on how Graham Ashcraft's slider was the best slider in the league at the time. So, and it's hard to have the best slider when you got, you know, Hunter Green out there, you got Skeens out there, Scoobles out there. You got all sorts of guys. Logan Webb's out there. Like, yeah, a lot of guys out there with great sliders. So, the fact that Graham Ashcraft led the league in movement, velo, effectiveness with his slider, it's pretty impressive. So, did it tick up in the bullpen? This was actually an interesting debate, because if you look at Graham Ashcraft as a starter versus Graham Ashcraft as a reliever, the mix may have changed. There's a lot more straight up cutter now. But did the velocities change? Did the stuff tick up? Did it, like, the stuff plus? Did the movement profile change? Did the locations get better? And I'll let you guys look it up yourself, but it's interesting when you do compare starter to reliever profile for a guy who, is moving to the pen and clearly is an effective pen piece, but also was an effective starting piece. It's interesting to see whether that's true. Now, like I said, statistically, it is true. Statistically, you get guys go to the pen, and rather than having to save their energy to stretch out up to 7, up to 9 innings, they could just go 1 inning, let it all eat, and maybe they tick up a mile an hour, maybe their vertical break ticks up another inch, maybe their horizontal break sweeps another inch, but that's not necessarily everyone. It's just the average. So some guys, that's not the case. Some guys, they stay the same, and depending on what happens to their arsenal, if you take a guy who used to throw 4 pitches or 6 pitches, and now they're only throwing 2, then it's possible that overall, how they were effective before, now some of that effectiveness, which relied on maybe a batter second guessing what pitch type's coming, now that's disappeared, So it just depends. But I'd say if you run some analysis, you query it up, go on Savant, do a little research, you'll find the answer is statistically, yeah. Movement to the pen does on average improve the velocity of the movement and ultimately the value of a pitcher. But as with everything, there is variance. So, okay, I said I was going to be brief, and I'm clearly not. So, and that was supposed to be the easy one. Oh my God. Okay, next one. All right, this one I think I could do. This one I think it could be pretty quick. Someone asked about the effects of salary cap. So, someone asked, like, what would the effects be? Are there any unintended effects? So, for those wondering, MLB is the only North American professional sports league with no salary cap. So there is no cap, no spend limit on a team. You can spend as much as you want. Hold on, I don't want to get ran over by a concourse cleaning machine. Okay. I'm going to run around the concourse cleaning machine. So it's not that crazy to think that a salary cap is, MLB wants a salary cap because all the other leagues have it. And salary cap on premise, on philosophy, is the ability to get other teams who have disadvantages in terms of talent, better talent, because a team can't just outspend another team. Now there's a cap, therefore other teams are going to be able to acquire players because teams at the very top might not have enough money to keep the same amount of players or to collect as many players as they can just by outpricing everyone, right? The issue with the cap, of course, is whether it's effective. A lot of people like to point to NFL and how they have a cap. They definitely have a cap. And is it effective? The same teams or a very similar amount of teams tend to be in playoff contention every year, tend to be in Super Bowl contention every year. And some of these teams who have been at the bottom of the league in a rebuild mode seemingly have been in that mode for a very long time, right? I won't name any teams, but I'm sure y'all can guess, or just look it up yourselves, which teams have had poor performance year over year as of the recent years. And a lot of that is tied to two things, right? One, the importance of a quarterback. So there's a specific position that generates a ton of added value beyond all other positions in American football, and the quality of your quarterback is definitely one of them. And then the other side is your defense, the ability to get to the other quarterback. So are you able to take what you have defensively and apply pressure and put quarterback decision making in decrease the value of a quarterback's ability to make good decisions. So if you do those two things, typically you have a pretty good team. And if you point to a lot of teams, that is the case. They have a good quarterback and they have an ability to generate pressure consistently on the opponent quarterback. So I mean, not to make American football simplified, it is a very complex sport. But with those two tenets, how does the salary cap affect, teams that have invested a lot of money into their quarterback and to their ends, or the quarterback into their linebacking group, the quarterback into their defensive line, right? And it's not a for sure thing, but a lot of the time, that is kind of where you start with the story. Is the quarterback good? And does the defense get to the other quarterback? So that's one side of it, is just the effectiveness of the quarterback. And how much does that play on the salary cap? Well, if teams are smart and they're adding a quarterback, then they're saving money, or they're saving a percentage of their payroll to acquire a quarterback, right? So that's one thing. Now, another side of a cap, right? Like, not just what you would expect a cap to do, but what would they're concourse cleaner, So not only what you would expect them to do, but hold on, he's letting me by. Chat. Okay, I'm back. Not only would you expect teams rationally to divide up their salary cap to acquire these players, but you also have to think, like, on top of that, like, are there places where you're going to just need to spend more, and therefore you're going to spend less on other places, right? Not all quarterbacks get the same pay. Not all defensive ends get the same pay. So when you're talking about the best end versus another best end, they're going to want to make more money than each other. So sometimes that tips the scales in the quality of other positions, which are also important, right? Your left tackle, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, all of them, right? They all have to make a lot of money. So is a cap effective in the NFL? Well, clearly, if the best teams are still the best teams year over year, and every now and then you do get another team jump up into the fray, but typically isn't a full switch of teams, then it's hard to argue that there is competitive balancing or parity. Now, the last thing I'll say is, you don't have to take it from me. You could just look at economical research. There's research dating back 30, 40, 50 years on not just salary caps in sports, but financial reasons to cap salaries at any company, right, is setting a roof, a ceiling on earning detrimental to your ability to not just retain, but hire at all. And there's some articles out there, specifically sports articles, which suggest no, not only is it ineffective, but it kind of does the opposite of what you want it to do, right? There's this paper out there by Paul something, 1998. Paul starts with an S, but he says that he did a bunch of research and he said that professional sports caps, relatively ineffective. Looked at all the major sports, looked at it year over year, looked at what the proposed reasons why implementing caps would have changed the sport, and showed those are the reasons. They're not really working. Similar, not too long ago, 10 years ago, someone in Forbes wrote a similar article, Lee Steinberg, talking specifically about NFL parity. Does it work? Is it helpful? And they said no. They're talking about the same things I'm talking about now, 10 years ago. That the same teams are going into the playoffs year over year, regardless of spend. You could put a cap on it. If you didn't, it would still be the same. So, one thing that is important to know about salary caps, in my opinion, is we always talk about it from the point of view that player earnings at the top need to be limited, right? But that perspective is coming from whom? Well, it's coming from people who don't want to pay exorbitant amounts to win whatever sports games they're playing. So, very rarely do we get to hear about instituting a spend floor, right? Not just a minimum pay, right? I think minimum pay is important, but a spending floor is perhaps slightly different than a minimum amount you have to pay for a player. So, Major League Baseball, minimum pay is around $800,000. But if you collected, 26 or let's call it 40 players at that rate, you're obviously not cracking $40 million, which would effectively be the lowest spend team of all time, right? I think at the lowest, somewhere between Tampa Bay and Milwaukee and formerly Oakland, you got a payroll of around 80 million. So to imagine something south of 40 million would be kind of insane, right? So what if we raise the spend floor, right? Rather than affecting individual player earnings at the top and assuming that there is this so-called trickle-down effect of inability to acquire one extra player who's the best onto a super team. What if you force teams to pay for more players. You know, you force teams to go from, let's say, the lowest, like 80 million. You force teams to pay 120 million floor, right? Now they have to spend that money. Now they have to find players who match that value. Wouldn't that raise parity in a similar way that a salary cap would raise parity? You know, like, rather than, you know, deflating the top end, why don't you inflate the bottom end? But that's probably a concept that doesn't get spoken about because the people who have to make these decisions, who pay the money for these things, in conjunction with each other, they probably don't want to pay more, right? Like, think about owning a car. Like, what's the best things to do when you own a car? Like, okay, well, what if you just buy a new car? Like, that would probably fix a lot of things. Well, that's too expensive. Like, what if I just, you know, keep the same car, limit spend by improving the tires, add some, you know, Rain-X on the windshield, change out the windshield wipers, get it detailed once in a while. Yeah, those things improve it too. But that's like the cost-effective way to keep your car going. Perhaps the better thing is just to get a whole new car altogether. You know, like, it will last even longer than your current car. A lot of the things in it will come with all those things. There's improvements that you don't have. Why don't you just do that? And it's just not cost effective for people. People just believe, no, you could just replace things, keep it how it is, it'll be fine. And that's true for a while. I mean, my car's about to be 10 years old. So I've had 3 cars in my life. So they've all lasted really long. But even I'm thinking, like, man, this car's 10 years old. I should probably think of trading it in. It doesn't have a ton of miles. I don't drive a ton. Maybe get just a better car. You know? So when you think about the cap, yeah, we think about it from the perspective of, like, what is the cheapest way to provide parity? But what about, like, what is a way to just provide parity from the other side? The teams that need parity are the teams that also aren't necessarily spending a ton of money, right? So if spend and wins are so correlated, which they are, you could Google that, you could look that up. Why don't you just raise the floor as opposed to dropping the ceiling? So, okay, I thought I was gonna get to 3, but I think it might just be 2. Man, this last one, it was supposed to be the one I started with, but decided to go with the baseball question first. And I thought that was gonna be fast. Guess we're gonna have to save that one for next time. Okay, chat. Hope we do it here tonight. Kind of sad last night. I don't want to be sad again. So, okay. Find me on Discord. Post comments. Also, like, I know this is like the chat's podcast for those who, like, miss out on chat interactions, react sessions, and the stream in general. Kind of like doing this for the VOD frogs. But if you do feel like you want to share these out, I won't stop you. All right, y'all. I'll see y'all tomorrow.